Mr. Saktiandi.
Malay, please. May I start in Malay, please? Adalah tepat pada masanya bahawa kita mempunyai peluang ini untuk membincangkan perkara memelihara keharmonian kaum dan agama di Singapura. Sebagai seorang Melayu Muslim dan minoriti di Singapura, saya harap perkongsian saya dapat membantu menyumbang dan memperkuat keharmonian yang kita nikmati di Singapura. Ucapan kebencian atau ucapan yang menyinggung perasaan di dunia berpotensi mempunyai kesan yang besar kepada kami di Singapura. Idea kebencian yang menyebabkan tindakan yang tidak bertanggungjawab melanda hampir ke dalam wad atau akar umbi saya baru-baru ini. Serangan terbaru ke atas dua masjid di Christchurch. Serangan ini mungkin kelihatan jauh, tapi sesungguhnya saya terkejut apabila mendapati ia tidak begitu jauh rupanya. Ia telah memberi kesan kepada seorang penduduk Melayu Islam di kawasan saya dan keluarganya. Saya melawatnya baru-baru ini di flat sewanya untuk menghantar ucapan takziah dan menunjukkan sokongan kepada keluarganya. Dia baru pulang daripada New Zealand dan berkongsi cerita tentang cucu lelaki sulungnya, Allahyarham Tariq Rashid Omar, dengan mata berair dan hampir berlinang. Salah seorang mangsa dalam serangan keganasan New Zealand. Puan Zawiyah binti Muhammad Tahir, 96 tahun, adalah generasi merdeka. Mempunyai 4 anak. Anak sulungnya, Rashid, seorang Singapura dan isterinya seorang warga New Zealand. Mempunyai 4 orang anak, satu daripadanya, Allahyarham Tariq. Sejurus masuk ke flatnya, dia menunjukkan gambar anak dan gambar Tariq sedang bermain bola dan semasa kecil. Puan Zawiyah bercerita bahawa Tariq memang sejak kecil lagi gemar mengumpul batu-batu seperti yang dilakukan oleh Madam Zawiyah semasa dia masih muda. Dia menyebut bahawa ini mungkin satu sebab mengapa dia tidak terkejut apabila mengetahui bahawa Tariq mahu menjadi seorang ahli geologi dan telah menamatkan pengajian di geologi di New Zealand. Dia berkongsi bahawa Tariq adalah seorang pemuda yang lembut, penyayang dan taat, pemain bola sepak berbakat yang melatih pasukan junior dan mempunyai potensi besar dengan masa depan yang cerah di hadapannya. Dia sedang cuba membantu orang lain semasa situasi di masjid itu dan semasa itu telah ditembak. Pada hari dia mendengar khabar yang mengejutkan Puan Zawiyah, dia panik. Satu-satu pemikirannya adalah untuk memeriksa sama ada dia mempunyai simpanan yang cukup untuk membeli tiket penerbangan ke New Zealand untuk bersama keluarga anak sulungnya. Walaupun dia tidak fasih bahasa Inggeris, dia terbang sendiri. Jadi beberapa komuniti dan sukarelawan perniagaan Islam, bukan Islam dan Cina di Toa Payoh East Novena telah berkumpul bersama untuk membantunya dalam apa cara sekalipun, termasuk untuk mengurangkan kos penerbangan kecemasannya. Allahyarham Tariq hanyalah satu individu yang tidak bersalah yang korban di kalangan 50 orang yang meninggal dunia di Christchurch. Tetapi saya yakin dan optimistik masyarakat kita di Toa Payoh East Novena umpamanya menyedari kesan-kesan ucapan kebencian boleh terkesan pada salah satu daripada kita sendiri dan telah menawarkan bantuan. Jadi di sini dalam keselesaan Singapura, kita juga tidak kebal jika ucapan kebencian pada kumpulan yang berlainan atau segmen masyarakat tertentu berkembang di seluruh dunia. Kami mempunyai ahli keluarga, warga Singapura pelbagai agama dan bangsa yang menebar sayap secara meluas dan tinggal di luar negara untuk bekerja juga. Di sini di media sosial Singapura dan keterbukaan kami membolehkan kami terdedah kepada pelbagai maklumat. Apalagi peri pentingnya kita harus waspada dan ambil sikap tegas terhadap ucapan kebencian terhadap mana-mana kumpulan atau segmen di Singapura. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in English, please. My resident story and the loss of her eldest grandson is just one example, but I hope it should raise awareness about how hate speech could have adverse consequences for anyone when we least expect it. Indeed, we have many policies and laws in place to root out behaviours and factors that threaten social harmony, such as the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act and Penal Code, Section 298, 298A, 267C, 505, and also the Sedition Act. We are lauded as the model of social harmony. But let me state up front that we should not allow offensive and hate speech to allow to normalize in Singapore. That is within our control. What happens in other countries are beyond our control. In his statement, Minister posed a few questions to the House. I wish to state my views early on in my speech first. I fully agree with the Minister and the facts and studies he shared that address hate speech targeting ethnic and religious communities via logic and reasoning is likely to be ineffective. Normalizing it and allowing it to proliferate is dangerous. I also agree with the Minister that restrictions on offensive speech, even when it is not strictly speaking hate speech, needs to be applied judiciously, and I still think Singapore's current approach in dealing with offensive speech via the assessment of words and the material and its likely impact on targeted community is a middle ground approach to take, relative to a blanket ban on all offensive speech and material. I believe the government has been impartial, fair and just in applying decisions thus far. But I think we can improve on making sure the neutrality of government in such decisions remains strong and unwavering. The Minister has highlighted clearly what government neutrality is key and the perception of it even more. How can we ensure that the neutrality remains so when future decisions are made? Can we have a council of sorts akin to the Presidential Council on Minority and Religious Rights to advise the deciding minister on matters relating to hate and offensive speech so that the neutrality element remains guarded? It could help alleviate issues of conflict of interest if in the future the deciding minister is of a particular religion or race impacted by the offensive hate speech or ideology, in particular for future governments. In addition, hate speech and offensive speech applies to various segments, races and religions on either side of the spectrum. For example, the rise in Islamophobia globally and the risks it poses to the Muslim community. I'm sure MHA has looked into this, and while the financial cost burden may be there, I feel it is necessary to reiterate that additional resources must be added to our security intelligence departments to look at terrorist threats from both sides of the spectrum, as well as rising Islamophobia, so that internally we have a balanced view of the threats that may hit Singaporeans, regardless of race, language or religion, and take preemptive action if needed. But on top of all this, what more can we do? We must never be complacent, and we should embrace ideas that help to mitigate the dangers of normalization of hate speech. We are all well connected to the world. We have a high number of citizens who have internet access and are avid consumers of foreign news and social media content. I would like to elaborate briefly on 2 points. One is how we can build resilience in our future generation to identify offensive and hate speech and reject such efforts. Second, how we as a nation can take efforts at all levels to reduce the risk of perpetuating stereotypes of segments by race or religion which can be used as fuel or seeds for hate and offensive speech. Mr. Speaker, it is troubling to note from the Institute of Policy Studies poll recently released, or study which was released, which said that although more than 97% of respondents said religious leaders should not incite violence or hatred against other religions, 26.8% of respondents were open to religious extremists posting their views on social media. Why do our young have such views? Many of them, according to the IPS study, are aged 18 to 25 years, who indicated they would allow such views to be espoused as long as this do not instigate harm on others. Did we miss a step in our outreach to our young to educate them on the dangers of exposure to such posts? My story earlier on my resident, with regards to my resident, highlighted the dangers, the deadly dangers of hate speech, and it kills. So I hope we could initiate an inter-ministry approach involving MHA, MCCY, MOE and MCI to look into this. I read about a school in Brazil where students are taught how to identify fake news. Maybe we can apply a similar approach in our schools and tertiary institutions and use such skills to identify hate or offensive speech so that it does not get normalized easily here. Next, the threat of terrorism from all races and religion is a practical reason for all Singaporeans to take Islamophobia, for example, and all forms of racial and religious discrimination seriously. We would be looking at Singapore through rose-tinted glasses if we truly believe there's no racial discrimination in Singapore, or that it is so insignificant that we do not have to worry. This absolutely necessitates the conversations we are having here. It is not uncommon to find discriminatory comments, often based off negative stereotypes, left on discussion platforms on social media. These comments are not malicious to be prosecuted under our legal framework, but they demonstrate a lack of understanding and unfair generalization towards specific races or religions. Because we have the MHRA and relevant penal code sections, these comments are already largely self-censored. So imagine what hateful words would transpire if we didn't have the act in place. However, to minimize discrimination and pursue social harmony, we must go beyond restricting hate speech. The government should expand efforts to encourage racial harmony beyond school to the workplace, as well as working in the community. Maybe more can be done to encourage even more Singaporeans of various races and religion to have friends from other races, and most importantly, for sharing more stories of bonds and trust between races more prevalently, in order to build up the trust premium among the different races and religion. The risk of perpetuating of stereotypes is another issue that we should address, as it can fuel as an ingredient for hate speech and ideology. If we perpetuate stereotypes, parents, for example, can pass on this mistrust and stereotypes to their children, and the cycle carries on generation after generation. The mistrust and stereotyping will remain entrenched, never going away, unless we nip the problem in the bud and change these mindsets and perceptions. As such, I would like to suggest that young parents be exposed to programs that will promote opportunities for them to mingle with people from all races and religion and to experience their culture. We have done all this. Maybe this can be done even more at the grassroots level through sports and interest groups, for example, as mentioned by Min Grace Fu earlier. In 10, for example, in Toa Payoh Novena, we have cycling enthusiast group made up of young professionals of various races, and sports could be a good example to form bonds. We are trying to encourage more young parents to join these activities. Through these programs, it is hoped that they will develop positive perceptions about their fellow Singaporeans, regardless of race, and hope they guide their own children with love, not discrimination or hate. If from stereotyping, distrust, mischief and misguidance among some people build up, then with the prevalence of hate speech and hate messages, the cracks can turn into chasms, and once this happens, what is not normal becomes the norm. I know that with the help of the IRCC, the Interracial and Religious Confidence Circles, some religious organizations of different faiths have collaborated to implement volunteer programs such as the Blood Donation Drive by Masjid Khalid and Heart of God Church. I hope that such collaborations will be encouraged, as charity is an excellent platform to put volunteers and beneficiaries on the same page. I would thus suggest to create more opportunities for interaction we can look into, such as a Buddhist volunteer who usually volunteers for the temple's charity programs could work with Muslim volunteers at a mosque to distribute food to the needy or perform ushering duties, for example. Hindu volunteers could put together a performance to entertain elderly beneficiaries of a Buddhist temple. This is in line with our national goal of encouraging Singaporeans to be more involved in volunteer work. Religious institutions, with their large networks of beneficiaries and NGOs, are good places to start if they open themselves to accepting volunteers of any religion. We cannot restrict hate speech beyond the shores of Singapore, but we can denormalize it at home by making it not cool, by speaking out against it. As long as it is something that seeks to glorify hate speech, it must not be allowed in Singapore. This is not because Singaporeans are immature and easily swayed by hate speech. No. It is about sending a very clear message and taking a firm stand against something that threatens our social fabric. Can we do more to help others understand why certain acts or words are so offensive that it is not a matter of being small-minded or intolerant? I wonder if we can tap on local celebrities and influencers, or even more, to help engage the youth and spread the message. Can we also work with our corporate partners and labour unions to educate our employers and employees to reduce efforts to perpetuate stereotypes or build whistleblowing policy on discrimination and actions that stereotype certain segments? On a final note, the internet has become a toxic waste dump for hate and malice, and any news stories can pretty much be manipulated to divide people, not to mention perpetuate stereotypes too. The internet promotes a sheep mentality that turns people into raging mobs without obtaining a full understanding of the situation. In Singapore, children as young as 8 years old have access to the internet. This is a crucial matter that we have to pay attention to. I look forward to the strengthening of our laws to rein in those who spread hate speech via internet platforms and social media. I would like to thank Minister Shanmugam once again for the debate and his decisive actions taken recently, as well as a clear point-by-point explanation to explain how Singapore deals with hate speech and why it needs to be unique to our context. I hope Singapore will continue to walk the tightrope with good balance to preserve the peace and harmony that we enjoy. This is a never-ending goal that our leaders, religious groups, all Singaporeans must continuously strive for. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I support the current measures to curb hate speech, but I think more can be done to support it for future generations.